I am just super grateful to have you all being here. I don't know if it's your lunch break or your planning period, or if you're just home making the best of your time, but I know you are all busy, super busy. So I appreciate you being here with me. Penn State, I'm actually back at Penn State for my doctorate right now, and today is a wellness day. So we don't have any classes today. Instead of spring break, they're trying to plug in these wellness days. So I'm excited to be spending mine with you. So I'm going to share my screen so that you can see my PowerPoint. Give me 1 second here. Get everything situated. Okay. I'm assuming we all can see this, hopefully. Today, we're going to be talking about collaborating with paraeducators to support positive peer interactions and communication outcomes for students with communication impairments, all those kids that we are working with. So before I get started, I just have a slide on disclosures. I have no financial disclosures related to this presentation. I did just mention, though, I am at Penn State currently in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders, and I'm working with Dr. Janet Light towards my doctorate. My program currently has a very strong AAC focus, as that's her area of research. So you'll see in some of the slides, I talk about examples that are relevant to AAC and complex communication needs. But I'm hoping that most of you will find everything I'm saying relevant across the spectrum of communication needs. So I just wanted to thank Dr. Light for her input on this presentation. Really briefly, I know Elizabeth mentioned that my bio is on the Schoology account, but I wanted to just talk a teensy bit about my clinical experiences and my educational experiences and why working with paraeducators is so near and dear to me. I worked for IU13 in Lancaster County in early intervention, and then I worked both in St. Louis, Missouri, and at Warwick School District here in Pennsylvania as a school-based SLP. And I know how busy our days are, how many kids we have on our caseload that we are trying to reach and trying to make an impact for. My research area of focus currently, while I'm back at school, is looking at cortical visual impairment and the impact of kids who have that and how they use AAC. But I'm also very interested in how SLPs can utilize people around us to further our services and further our impact for our students. I put here that I consider myself a people person. When I used to work in the schools, I would say to my husband, I think I talked to like 222 people today, and I'm sure you can all relate. OTs, PTs, teachers, the kids, parents, we're talking to people constantly. But often, like Elizabeth said, we feel so alone. We feel like we're on this little island by ourselves. So I'm hoping that you get little tidbits of knowledge from my presentation today that can help you address things going forward and to make you not feel so alone, feel like other people are there on your team helping you to accomplish these goals with your students. I'm going to back up really quick to my first slide because I wanted to mention I chose this random picture here because it's multifaceted, and every time you look at it, you might notice something different. And I feel like that's our role as SLPs. We're multifaceted, both in what we're providing for our students and our relationship with others. So we're going to keep that in mind as we go forward today. So this slide, I think Elizabeth is going to help me make sure that this is in the chat. This is a Google Jamboard. If you go to this link from the chat, you should be able to participate. There's 3 different Jamboards up where you can use a Post-it note that's off to the left of the Jamboard to put your response. This presentation is something I'm continuing to adapt and work on as I think about paraeducators with my research, and I would love your input. So if you can please, whenever you start to zone out during this presentation, go to the Jamboard and give me your responses so I have some feedback from you. Thank you. Okay, so our agenda for today, we're going to talk about 2 potential problems that us as SLPs face in our day-to-day work with our students. Then we're going to talk about a case study that's actually a student I worked with and how what we're talking about applied to him. We're going to talk about the role of paraeducators, whether you're in early intervention or in a school district. We're going to talk about how paras are trained. And then we're going to talk about the case study that I mentioned and how I infused support from a para to help me out. And then at the end, we'll leave time for questions. So I had permission to use this photo of one of my all-time favorite students. However, when I found out this was going to be recorded and on YouTube, I didn't want his picture out there forever, but I'm going to call him B for the remainder of this presentation. And when I was putting this together, B and my experiences with him helped to really shape what I was thinking about. So B came to my school district as a kindergartner, and I worked with him up until 3rd grade. He's in 4th grade now. He was one of 2 surviving triplets who came to us in kindergarten with a whole host of medical complexities. He had a trach, he had a feeding tube, he had definite speech and language needs, and he even needed AAC in kindergarten so that he could communicate. He also was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, which impacted his speech and language and his social language use. So I'm going to keep referring back to him as the case study throughout this presentation. But thinking about B or thinking about any student in your life, in your caseload, let's think about these potential problems. There's 2 potential problems and many more that we face, right? The first is, how are we to ensure that our communication goals for our students are prioritized throughout the school day and not just within our own speech therapy sessions? And second, the goal of communicating and helping our students to communicate better is so that they can be successful in relationships with others, not just in the academic world. So how can we ensure that positive peer relationships are happening for our students when they leave our therapy room and go out into the rest of the school day and then beyond? So those are the 2 problems we're going to address today. This is the family systems framework. It's a theoretical model created by Manduck et al. That helps us to understand where children fall within a greater system. So in the middle where I have the first star, it says a child with complex communication needs. And this could be any child, not just a complex communication child. But we see within this first microsystem, the child, their family, maybe a non-biological neighbor or someone who's very close to them, a caregiver, their siblings, all these people that they're interacting with very closely. And then if we look at the next level out of the concentric circles, we see the mesosystem. And this is where we're going to kind of focus on today. This is the child within their school system, their interactions with peers, with teachers, and with service providers, us, right? And we see these errors that go in between the circles because our students are constantly back and forth and having to adapt between their really tight circle and then their school circle. And I'm thinking about services for B or for any student. There are so many pieces to consider, and I'm sure you feel the same. But if I only focus on that student when they're with me and I kind of ignore all of these other parts, I'm really limiting how much of an impact I can have for that student. So today we're going to try and broaden our focus a little bit to pull in some of these other people. But having just worked in the schools last year, I am also a realist. And I realize that for every single student on your caseload, it is very hard to consider every one of their family systems and all of the people that they interact with. It's nearly impossible. I put here, considering this framework for 30 to 70 plus students on your caseload, you can't do it alone. So that's why we're looking for other ways to make this doable, to make this feasible. I think it was my principal at my last school who always said, work smarter, not harder. So we're looking for ways to do that. The 2 problems that I referred to at the beginning of the presentation about communication outcomes outside of our room and also positive peer relationships, we're up against some hard walls in those areas. We know that there, from research and from our clinical practice, that there are definite challenges to inclusion for students who have disabilities or communication needs. A few that I have here. The first one, children report awareness of their differences. They report that they have to work hard to keep up with peers and that they might feel lonely, probably based on differences, possibly a communication impairment. Second, perceived differences may be recognized as early as preschool, which could lead to discrimination. So children notice differences earlier than we even give them credit for. When I think about B, who I showed at the beginning of the presentation, when he was coming into kindergarten at our school, his parents wanted to do an informational session for the other students in his class. They were a little weary that the kids might be like freaked out because of his trach and because of his feeding tube. So they did an informational session with a doll where they showed some of these things to the students. And it was great because those kids within his class had a better understanding of what was going on. But they also immediately knew that B was a little bit different than everyone else, that he had a nurse that was going to accompany him full time. So we're walking this fine line between educating students about differences, but also hoping that it doesn't turn into discrimination. Finally, this is relevant to AAC, but early education about what AAC is and how a target student uses it could reduce misunderstandings and feelings of pity among other students. However, it has not been found to change their behavior. So even if they understand what AAC is, it's not enough to really change how they're acting towards that person with AAC or towards that child. Furthermore, there are many challenges to social interaction for our students with communication impairments. A study done in 2012 followed 16 students who used AAC in inclusive classroom settings and found that they almost exclusively interacted with their para or their teacher and had limited to no interactions with peers. So that's really disheartening and sad, but any of us who can think about our students with AAC, we can see how that could be a very real fact. And then we know there are many roadblocks for classmates to interact with students who use AAC or to interact with students with communication impairments. They might just have interest mismatches. They might feel this obligation to socialize with the student rather than really a desire to, maybe because they're paired up with that student, or maybe because the teacher has told them, oh, you do so great with B, so we're always gonna put you with B. And then the final point, there might be a tendency for peers to want to come up and interact with a student like B, but then they end up talking to the para or the teacher instead, maybe because they just don't know how to interact. They don't have those strategies and those skills to interact with someone with communication differences. So as you can see, and as we all know from our experiences, we're up against a lot of challenges. In summary of the problem, carryover of our communication outcomes to the classroom setting is difficult if we are the only ones targeting these goals. And positive peer relationships are difficult for our students with communication needs to form independently in inclusive classroom settings. So now that we all feel heavy and like, yeah, Tara, I already know all of this, I'm up against this every day, we have to move forward. We have to find some traction and take some action. So this is the International Classification of Functioning Health and Disability model from the World Health Organization. And I'm going to kind of use it from here on out to frame our problem. If we look at B, who I talked about in the beginning, just one of his health conditions or his needs was autism spectrum disorder. That's up here at the top. And then how does this impact his body function and structure? He has a speech and language impairment, somewhat due to the autism spectrum. In the activity realm, this causes difficulties with his expressive communication. And ultimately, it limits his participation, both in the academic education setting, but also in social relationships. Where we're going to focus on today, where we can take action that we're not already taking action, is down here at this environmental and personal factor level. Things down here at the bottom can be either strengths or like supports that are within a human or outside of the human, or they can be barriers and challenges. For B, I put personal factors, and most of them are really awesome strengths that he had. He's a male, he's 9 years old, he's passionate about natural disasters and dinosaurs. I can't even imagine if I was working with him this year with the pandemic, he probably was talking about it all of the time. And then despite his autism, he's motivated to make friends and try new activities. Under environmental factors, going forward today, we're going to talk about physical environment and then the social environment. We're going to kind of break those down, and we're going to look at barriers and hopefully be able to reframe our mindset to turn some of these things to supports and how we can help children in this aspect. Okay, so besides just B or any of the students in your mind, there's other people impacted by those two problems that I talked about at the beginning, and that's the peers of children on our caseload, the typically developing peers who are in their classroom or who are in their setting. We know by definition that a peer is someone of the same age, the same grade, someone with the same interests, or maybe just someone they sit next to on the bus. But let's think about, as educators, what are the roles that we assume these peers to take? A lot of times we just want them to be friends with the students that we work with. But then sometimes we put on this role that the child may either volunteer for, or we just assign to them as a helper to a student with a communication impairment. And that's all fine and dandy as long as it stays that both children are feeling positive effects from that relationship. Sometimes we turn peers almost into becoming the teacher to a student. B had one student with him in first grade who worked super well with him, but at parent-teacher conferences, it came out that she had talked to her mom and said it was actually too much. She felt like she was with him all day long because teachers kept pairing them together. And then finally, similar to that, sometimes peers are collaborative teammates who are assigned as like a partner. When we think about friendship, we want to preserve that mutuality. We want there to be equal understanding and have both the peer and our student with communication impairments to feel equal, like they're equally enjoying that friendship. So that's just something to keep in mind going forward. So as I said, if we revisit our ICF model, we want to think about where can we help to build capacity that we're not already. Right up here, body functions and structures, activities, and participation. We as the SLPs, we're already in there. We're working on their IEP goals. We're communicating to parents. We're trying to target those needs in that section. But where we struggle as SLPs is this environmental factor section, because we don't follow that child all day long. We wish we could. We wish everyone was working on our goals, but it's impossible, right? So we have to think about how can we bolster up these things down here that are potentially barriers and turn them into supports. So I wrote a paper on this topic in this past semester in my program. So that's where this chart comes from. And like I said, most of the examples here are more relevant to students with complex communication needs, but you can also reframe it in your mind and think about students with less severe needs as well. So what environmental factors serve as barriers to our students with communication needs? Like I said, we're going to break it up into the physical environment and the social environment. Within the physical environment and the social environment, this is not an exhaustive list. I'm sure you can think of many other barriers that exist. These are just a few things that I wanted to point out. So the first one, the actual space of our classrooms or hallways or wherever we're seeing students and wherever they're spending their time, that actual space can cause a barrier, as well as like the context for activities that we're giving students. So I have an example here that a student is always seated in the back of a classroom due to limited space for their adaptive equipment. That's a very concrete example, but you can think of times when the actual space is not conducive for our students with a communication impairment. Second is relevant to AAC. If a student has an AAC system, maybe the SLP put vocabulary on that device so that they're ready to participate in the classroom, but that student is not actually familiar with where the vocabulary is, and then they're not able to participate. So that's one thing relevant to AAC in the physical environment. Another one, and to me, this one sticks out hugely, in the physical environment, shared, meaningful, and accessible experiences. So if there's a full class activity planned on the Smartboard, but the general ed teacher didn't have time to anticipate alternative ways for your students with a communication impairment to participate. Making sure that all activities that are happening in the classroom are accessible for our students with differences. And then there's the social environment, which I think is even more challenging. I have 3 things listed here: social isolation. So I think a lot of our students notice this, like B, sometimes when he was talking, he started to notice that other people weren't understanding him. They were just going, yeah, and trying to get him to move along. So he stopped participating as much. Or if students start to recognize that, oh, no one's picking me as their partner because of my communication possibly. So that's something that serves as a barrier in the environment. And then we can think about both the social relational skills of the student we're working with, the target student. They might, need further support to work on these communication skills in the classroom. And then finally, thinking about that peer place in this whole puzzle, we're expecting peers to have these positive relationships with these students with communication impairments, but it might be difficult for them themselves to know how to relate to them or how to talk to them or how to understand them. So there's a lot of barriers to address here. And again, it brings that heavy feeling because we're like, how can we make a difference when we're up against all of this? So it's a sunny, beautiful day out and it's time for hope. This is Miss Allie. She's actually B's para. She had been since kindergarten. She still is now in 4th grade. However, he requires way less support throughout his school day. So she helps a lot of other people. I'm sure all of us, if your setting has paras there, I'm sure you can pick out a para or think of a para who is like an angel on earth and would do anything for the student that they're paired with or the students that they're paired with. And then I'm sure on the flip side of the coin, we can think about paras who are great people, but they're just there for a paycheck. It's just their job, and they're just doing what they have to do to get through the day. Either way, whatever kind of paras you're working with, we know that their role is critical to the development of a target student and essential in maintaining that child's school day routine. Because of B's autism, if Miss Allie wasn't there, it was really like a deal breaker. He was so used to his routine. We also, like I said, know that the experience and the skills of paras in our school districts vary greatly, from people who could basically teach the class on their own to people who have never worked with children before and they're just doing this because it was a job that popped up. Research has found that treating paras as vital team members can benefit the child and all of the other team members, which doesn't surprise me. And then the most saddening fact on this slide is that many paras feel underprepared to meet the needs of the students that they are paired with. So oftentimes paras have the least amount of training and are paired with the most difficult students in the entire school. And we expect them to just do that, to just do their day and support them the best they can, but we're not really equipping them and we're not empowering them. So we're just going to take a minute here. I just want everyone to self-reflect, maybe jot down on a piece of paper in front of you, or maybe go to the Jamboard right now would be a good time to if you haven't yet. I want you to just reflect on the paraeducators or paraprofessionals in your own setting. Are they trained? And if so, how? Who is responsible for that training? What content does the training typically cover? And are you ever asked to help with the paraeducator training? Maybe facilitate it, maybe create it, set it up. And then what is your honest gut reaction to being asked to help train paraeducators? So I'm going to take a drink of water for a minute while everyone ponders over these things, and then we'll go on. Okay, so I'm just going to speak to my experiences. Paraeducators at my previous school district were trained. It was somewhat of a blanket training across the board from elementary to high school, trainings that all paras needed to attend. Many of them were very broad topics, such as like child abuse, CPR, things that were very broad, not very specific to the setting that that para was working. The people responsible for the training were our special education administrator and the building administrators that worked above each of those paras. Like I said, the content was pretty broad typically. I was asked to help with paraeducator training the past 2 years. My principal said, we're going to have the paras once a month after school meet, and they're going to get like an hour of the hours that they need for training. Would you mind creating a PowerPoint or anything you want to talk to them about? Just come up with something to talk to them about. We need to get an hour in there for them. And my gut reaction, of course, was, oh, I don't really want to do that. I don't really know what to talk to them about. But I'll do it because I was asked to. And I actually really enjoyed it then because it brought out a lot of great discussion. But that kind of training where it's an hour with a group and it's very blanketed, it's not individualized, that's not always the most effective. And of course, us as busy SLPs are not going to be super psyched probably about being asked to take that on. So we're going to talk about some alternatives to that. I just wanted to throw this up here. This was in the NEA Today magazine in January 2021, and it talked about how school districts across the country are supporting children with special needs amidst the pandemic. And there was an article in here about support professionals or paraeducators and how they've proven so critical even amidst the pandemic, with virtually meeting with students with special needs or with helping the classroom teacher to reach out to them. So paraeducators are something we here in Pennsylvania are considering, but it's something nationwide that needs to be considered with how many needs and how many students that we have to take care of. So this resource, if you take anything with you from today, I'm hoping that you'll print this out. It's posted on the Schoology account as a PDF. But this just kind of outlines some considerations for you and your educational team and your administration going forward. It talks about some steps of how we could train paras that don't have to be overwhelming and that don't have to be this huge, big to do. They can be small, digestible, doable changes. I challenge everyone to think about this from now till the end of the school year, or if you're in early intervention, that probably goes through the summer. But maybe next fall, we can see some change in our districts for how paras are trained so that it can be more individualized to our students' needs. And it doesn't have to be these huge 1 hour or full day trainings that are really hard for anyone to plan for. So we're going to go through each of these steps. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. These are just things to consider, really taking us back to that ICF model and looking at the environmental barriers that our students are up against and how we can train paras to help in those areas. First, this is kind of my heart-to-heart moment. We know that our key outcomes, what we want someone to learn, really drives the content of what we teach or what we train. So I just challenge all of you to be really reflective about your own attitudes, behaviors, and responses in the school system. A lot of what I wanted to talk about today is just what we demonstrate or show to our paras then becomes what our children see. And I think if our attitudes are positive about trying to teach others and trying to share wisdom and knowledge that we have to others, it passes down to the kids and they see a more positive attitude towards our students who have communication impairments. A study done in 2005 about looking at peer interactions with students with AAC found that even really small changes in a paraeducator's behavior yielded these substantial increases in student interactions. So even really small changes that we can make and that we can have happen by reaching out to paras can create big, large changes for our students across the school day. So like I said, our training content is going to focus on both the physical and social environment of our students once they leave our speech room and are out there in the school setting. So again, we're going to focus the remainder of our time on how to reframe paraeducators as agents of positive change within our school systems. We're going to do 3 different things that we're going to talk about that come off of that PDF. We're going to consider the training content. What do we need to train them on? We're going to consider the training instructional approach. So how are we going to train them, knowing that paras are adults like us and come to the table with previous learning and previous knowledge? And then we're going to consider some quick and easy formats for training that don't need to be full days or full hour sessions, because who's got time for that? Again, so going back to our ICF model, our focus is down here on the environmental factors. So first, for the training content, and I just put a few examples here. At the end, we're going to go back to the case study, and I'll go through these more in detail about what I did with B and with Miss Allie. But in the environment, we know in the physical environment, there are 3 places that we can cause positive change. We can look to address the actual structural space or context in our classrooms. So just talking with paras about when they support a child in the classroom, what can they be looking for in the space or in the context of an activity that is going to facilitate communication for that child? That's one of the first things we want them to think about. You know, is if a child has a visual impairment, we're constantly thinking about, are they sitting in the right spot? Can they see the materials? We should be thinking about those kind of things for our communication students too, but we need paras to help us because we are not there in that classroom. Second, if you have students on your caseload who have AAC needs, in my experience, the paras often knew nothing about the AAC, and that was something I was trying to get better about. Training them, we need them to know troubleshooting. We need them to know how to turn the volume up and down. We need them to know how to search for vocabulary if it's not on the front page. We need them to know the proper positioning for that child. That could be a quick training with a para, is just those nitty gritties about an AAC system. And then what if something happens to the system? Do we have a backup for how that child's going to communicate that day? So AAC has its whole world of considerations specific to it for those students. And then to me, the most important one here is what little changes can paras make in the physical environment so that our students with communication needs can be a part of these meaningful and accessible experiences with their peers. We know the general ed teacher does not have time to consider the needs of all of these students and how the activity can be more accessible. So we need the paras to be going in there with that troubleshooting mindset of how can I help this to be better? So those are 3 things, very broad things that we can be talking to paras about so that they can go in there and impact that positive change. Similarly, we can look at the social environment. First, just helping to address that social isolation. The first piece of this is paras having a positive attitude towards the children that they're supporting. I've seen with some of those paras who are, just there for the paycheck or whatever, I've seen that their attitude towards that child with a communication difficulty is frustration. And when they show frustration, that's what peers see. And then that's what they start to model and imitate in their interactions for that child. So first and foremost is just trying to impart to paras how important their attitude and behavior is. I have here that paras can impart knowledge to peers about students who use AAC. In our tech-filled world, students are more accepting and knowledgeable about technology, but sometimes just explaining to them like, oh yeah, this is what B uses to share his answers, and then B would model what he was going to say. Sometimes that's enough for kids to understand better. And then clearly, we want paras to understand what we're working on, our communication goals, and how can they carry that over to the classroom setting. So that's bullet point number 2 here. Are there facilitation strategies we need them to carry over? Are we using visuals during our therapy sessions that the para could have on their lanyard with them in the classroom? We want to make sure that they're equipped with these same strategies that we're using so that they can do it in the real-time setting, because that's where it really matters. And I also have here just that they're facilitating a friendship-like quality of relationships for our students with communication impairments to the peers. One way to do that is like he loved talking about natural disasters and dinosaurs. Miss Allie was really awesome at, if she saw another student who she could tell had similar interest, just being like, oh my gosh, B, Jordan likes that too. And then kind of facilitating that play for our younger students, of course. But trying to think about what really does facilitate friendship. And then finally, oftentimes we need paras to model or teach strategies to the peers for how they could better interact with the students that we're working with. So I can think of another student who had a severe speech sound disorder and he wasn't well understood typically. And some of his friends got really good at asking him to act it out or draw a picture or explain it to them in a different way. And that helped so much. It helped to increase his friendships because all the kids knew how they could actually get him to explain himself better. So thinking about that social environment piece as well. So that's the training content. Let's think about instructional approaches. First and foremost, collaborative planning. We want to think of paras as equal to ourselves and as part of the team. A lot of times paras are thought of as an afterthought. And it's like, oh yeah, we got to put them together with that student quickly. But the more we can incorporate them from day one with that student and what is helpful for that student, they're going to feel more like they're part of the team. And I'm going to go into a few examples of that in a moment. Principles of adult learning is just reminding ourselves that paraeducators are adults who come to trainings or who come into conversations with us having previous knowledge and experience. And we want to build on those things. We want to build them up, like I said, to empower them. So bringing their previous experiences into mind, So I referred to this a little bit, but what worked for us, this is talking about B, Miss Allie, and myself. Up here are the types of training options that we used. So she had the school district mandated trainings that she had to attend, like other paras. Miss Allie, myself, and B's classroom teacher and OT and PT, we did a weekly rounding. We picked one day out of the week. I think it was Wednesdays. We met for like 10 minutes before the students came into the building, and we talked about what was going well with B, what was a group focus for us for that week going forward. And then similarly, we were able to work out with my administrator that Miss Allie would attend the last 5 minutes of B's speech session so that what he was doing with me could hopefully carry over into the classroom with Miss Allie. Finally, we had case management students for our students who had more than one service provider. And we started to invite Miss Allie to these. She was only able to come to a few minutes of it, but still just including her as part of the team and helping her to hear the strategies or our team's focus for B going forward. So I kind of broke down what we did by physical and social environment. Miss Allie was able to structure a facilitative activities in the classroom setting. She was trained in visuals and troubleshooting with B's AAC system because she came to his speech sessions with me at the end. And then she was included on the educational team, which helped her to plan for shared experiences in the classroom. In the social environment, I didn't bring this up before, and I'm glad that I'm seeing it now. As much as we want paras to provide support, it's equally important that we talk to them about fading their supports back. So Miss Allie became very attentive to B's needs, and she recognized when it was important to fade her supports back so that he could be feeling more independent and confident in social situations, especially as he got older. She also was able to prompt the use of his speech and language targets in real time, and she was able to model what worked with him for peers, especially in the younger grades. So these are some quick tips. Going forward, I know I gave a lot of information today. I'm hoping that PDF that is shared on Schoology, that you can take that back to your administration team or your SLP team. I'm also hoping that one of these quick tips here jumps off the slide to you and you think, yeah, I could start to do that. Invite a para to attend the last 5 minutes of your therapy session, either with admin approval or not. Get them in there so that they can see what's going on. Help a child that you're working with share one of their therapy targets with the para so that they can work on communicating with the para about their goals, and hopefully that will increase carryover to the classroom setting. Possibly speak to administration about protected Google sites for students who rotate between paras to share helpful information. This could be helpful for absences as well. Advocate for paras to attend an IEP meeting. This might be district mandated or IU mandated if this is allowed to happen. But if you think about who spends the most time with a child throughout their school day, it's the paras that they're paired up with in a lot of situations. So advocate for their attendance. And if not, ask paras for input that you can bring to the IEP meeting from the para. Something I would do here, a lot of the paras weren't confident or they didn't want to type up their input for IEP meetings. I think maybe they were a little intimidated about, that report style writing and having their thoughts and opinions in writing. I would have paras sometimes come to me when they had a free moment in their day, and I did too. And I would say, just talk to me about B. And I would type, and whatever they printed, whatever they said to me, I'd show it to them. We'd make sure it sounded okay. And then that's what I would bring. We don't want to put added stress or pressure on them, but their input and their observations are key. Like I said earlier, one of those principles of adult instruction, show paras what you want them to know. Don't just tell them. Consider rounding in settings where you push in for services like autistic support, multiple disabilities, like I talked about. Consider asking for rounding sessions where the whole team picks one student one day a week that you can talk about. And then ask, this might be like a next year plan, but talk to administration. Is it possible to have more individualized trainings for paras rather than a blanketed para training? And maybe that's that you can, maybe the paras can start to record, that they spent 5 minutes with you at each speech therapy session, and maybe that can start to accrue towards their total hours. I'm going fast here because I want you guys to have these tips, but I am close to the end. So finally, I'm just challenging everyone to consider paras as an accessible and powerful instrument to help foster positive peer relationships and carryover of our communication goals. Um, I am not here to tell you to add another thing to your to-do list. I'm trying to think about working smarter, not harder, and how we can empower these people that are working within these settings with us to really improve outcomes for our students. We're all likely in this career because we want to make a difference. We want our students to be able to communicate, and pulling in other people from our student circle to team up with us is one of the best ways to do it. So this is a quote I'm sure you've heard before, and I love it. And it makes me think about paras in this situation. They're likely doing the best they can until they know better. And then when they know better, hopefully they'll do better. So if we can model positive attitudes and behaviors, hopefully that will carry over to what paras are doing in the setting for these students that we have. Thank you, guys. I can take any questions. I also put my email here. I'd love to chat. I hope people added to the Jamboard as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tara. We have a couple questions for you and a couple overarching. So thank you so much for the information. We also asked for people to give their advice in the chat window as well, because we're all better together as a strong unit. So if you have some tips that have worked for you, please pop them in, because we are better together as a group. So first question I have for you is, we know that paras who don't have their associate's degree or a higher degree are required to have a credential competency, which is where a lot of that training piece comes in. How would you suggest, or what tips do you have to advocate for paras who need additional training regarding the IEP needs? So you did put a tip to advocate. Do you have any tips on how to advocate, or what has worked for you to get paras training?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and it's not something that was in the forefront of my mind when I first started at my district. It took a few years till this really came onto my radar. But at the beginning of the school year, our administration will be talking about trainings that they had lined up for paras for the coming school year. And that's when I was able to say, like, oh, I have a few things that I think are specific to the children that I work with that would be relevant to them. So I know it's hard to think about that now, especially that we're in March of the school year, but even reaching out to administration at this point, some good ideas are like SDIs. A lot of paras need explanation about, we think that SDIs are very straightforward, but things like wait time, there's a lot of things on SDIs that paras could use more information on. So even if you're sitting there right now and you're generating that list in your mind, just shoot your administration and administrator an email. And this doesn't mean that the responsibility has to be all on you next year or this year to do that training. But I think sometimes administration is struggling to know what to train paras about as well. So they're picking these really blanketed things that might not be particularly relevant. So I think that if we put our thoughts out there and we use this key knowledge that we have, we could help kind of change what they're being trained on.
Thank you. And then another question, what would you recommend when an LEA or admin pushes back on getting para input for IEPs with the view that they are just support staff?
That is also a great question and a great point. And I wanted to speak to that because I had an administrator who was very supportive of our paras and really valued their input. I think that I'm saying this with caution. The way that I shared with you all about what I would do, where I would have paras just come to me and kind of talk and I would type up what they said, I think you could sneak that in there without getting into too much trouble to say, hey, B's para came to the last 5 minutes of our speech session, and I was just able to ask her how it's going for him throughout the day. And then at the meeting, maybe you don't actually type their input into the IEP, but maybe anecdotally, you just share some of the things that they shared with you to the parent. You need to toe the line knowing your administration of how that's going to go, maybe bringing it up to them ahead of time. But I think administration hopefully can see that paras they spend the most time with these students. They have a lot of input to provide. I understand though, wanting to make sure that the way that they type their input or say their input is appropriate. So sometimes that's good for us to be the mediator. That's why I suggested us being that type person in the middle.
Thank you. Along similar lines, how can we as SLPs empower paras to be part of the team? Because sometimes they feel so helpless or are told how to do things all day, and their behavior may appear like they don't care or aren't listening, but it might be deeper than that. So how can we empower them as professionals?
Oh, that's awesome too. And empower is like the word I wanted to get across here today. So I love that that question included that. Um, just some simple ideas like when you talk to paras, letting them know that their input's important. I had one para who worked with another student that I had. She started for me keeping like a journal. She just daily, he had a behavioral chart, but on the back, she was just writing down like things that he said that were relevant to his IEP goals. And I asked her to do this because I was like, is he doing this in the classroom? But this became something that was empowering to her because she felt like she had a purpose and a job, which was to give this information back to me. I think anytime that we can help someone, not even paras, anyone in any role, to feel like what they're doing makes a difference. And I think that's why I was so fired up about this today, is when we give information to paras, we're helping them to see that they can make small changes and improve outcomes for our students. So I think just even giving them little manageable tasks throughout the day will hopefully empower them. And when we're checking in with them, how's that going? That's helping them to feel like they're part of the team and to feel like what they're doing matters.
Excellent, thank you. And somebody else wrote in, one of her tips was collecting data and how that really empowers. So you guys are on the same wavelength about how that importance, because so often they don't feel like they're as important. No, I don't know if I should phrase it this way, but on the other spectrum, how can you problem solve a root cause of paras perhaps not following through with the plan? So the example would be an augmentative communication system that the para is encouraging speech only, or something to that that frame.
Right. So you mean like if something the para is doing is actually like serving as a barrier, how can we troubleshoot that?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've all been up against that as well. And that's also difficult. Us as the SLPs, we're not like in charge of the para, we're not their boss. So it might be helpful if you can like see if you can go with them into that setting, maybe cancel that child's typical speech session and instead push in with the para so that you can model the way to handle things appropriately. But I think the more we pull paras in as part of the team and we're checking in with them regularly, it's going to help with that carryover to make sure they're doing the right thing. I can't speak to all examples there because I know in some cases there's probably extreme examples of paras not doing what they're supposed to. But I just encourage you to think of those circles, think of all the people that are within your reach and see how you can support and build that para up and try to model what you want them to do.
Right, thank you. If you guys have any other questions for Tara, please pop them into the chat. We have some great advice coming in, and I will make sure I pull it off the chat and throw it in the Schoology so that we share. So keep posting it. Some are pretty long to read in this point, but if you have any additional questions, please do add them now. And as we wait for a few extra questions to come in, Tara, I'm just going to give the code.
Oh, yeah.
Just in case people are looking for it right now. It is a little early, but the code is Paras Rock, all lowercase. I will put it in now. If you don't get it exact, we know, so don't worry. If it's Para Rock, I will accept it. They are all hand read at this point, so you don't have to look any further.
Oh, and I just looked at the Jamboard, and thank you, everyone. There's tons of things on there for me to check out. I appreciate it.
So much there. And I added to the chat window, it sometimes helps for SLPs to know what your para has been trained in. So if you have understanding that your para has gone to Patton for a para training, or your local IU who does a lot of the compensatory training information, it's always helpful to know to scaffold to them on the information that they have. So that is all in the chat window for you as well. So I don't see any other questions. Tara, do you have anything else you'd like to address in the next 30 minutes?
I thank everyone for being here and for the great questions. And again, I hope there's just like a tidbit of something that you took away from today that you can put into practice either this year, tomorrow, or next year in the future.
Thank you so much for having this conversation with us today. Wonderful presentation. We really appreciate your input. You are coming back to one of our sessions, right? So I'm going to put a shameless plug in. Tara's going to come to one of the open forums. So if you're a member of our speech language open forum, Tara's coming back. So we're really excited to have her come there. Lots of positive feedback. Again, it's Paras Rock for the survey. The survey link is in the Schoology, but let me pull it up again for you and post it. And Tara, my last question for you actually is, when I go to the Penn State RERC website, which I'm very familiar with, if you go to that site, I'm not seeing the exact para training. I'm seeing like an input vibe on it, but could you post that? Is it available?
Yeah, so they're not like just formatted for paras. They're AAC trainings in general, which I can send to you, Elizabeth, and make sure we have the link.
Okay. And those are always really helpful if you are looking for additional information on AAC past what Patton does, which is amazing. I have our colleague Tammy is lead for that. They do amazing work, but the RERC also has some great trainings as well for that. All right, so the Google form is in there. It's Paras Rock. I will stick around for a couple minutes to answer any logistical questions that you may have. Again, we thank Tara so much for volunteering her time today to help us out. And we are really excited to have more future PhDs like you in the field with school-based practice. So we are excited for that. And oh, Tammy put in there, save the date, AAC Talks web conference, May 14th. Absolutely, if this is a topic, even if it's not a topic, you never know when a child's going to move into your footprint. So AAC Talks is coming up.